It's functioning. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I hope that you have a very intensive and nice evening yesterday. How many of you slept enough? One, all. I hope that this session will be interesting enough to not see people start sleeping. This session is quite new in the frame of the Inspire conference because we are really today trying to see how Inspire could really contribute to better economies. You know that the European Commission and European Unions have put now job creations, market development as one of the key milestones. We are suffering the financial crisis, so we need to reestablish our economy. And one of the principles is that good knowledge, good data are fundamental to improve economies. What you can see on the screen is not my definition, but is the definition taken from OECD. So economies are now based on good knowledge and good technology, and we are quickly moving to a data-intensive society. This morning, our panel will try to address from different points of view what could be relevant for our communities, in particular for Inspire, in order that we can make really Inspire effectively and helping in creating jobs and better economies. And we will start with a presentation from Dr. Andrew Trigg, that is the head of data strategies and chief geographic information officer at the UK Land Registry.
Thank you, Alessandro, and good morning, everybody. I've been asked to give a perspective this morning from the perspective of a data provider, and also looking a little more widely than just Inspire, but looking at open data in general and what that means to data providers from within the public sector and more specifically within the UK. I'm going to very quickly cover four topics in the 15 minutes or so that I have to talk. I'm going to give you a bit of background to Land Registry itself. I'm then going to set that in a global and European context of open data and the initiatives which are being brought to bear on data providers. I'm also going to look at the national context in the UK, because that's clearly very important to how Land Registry has been operating and responding to the open data agenda, which is the third of my 4 points. What Land Registry has done in reaction to that global and European context and national context. And then perhaps most importantly, I'm going to spend quite a bit of time looking at the challenges that we've had to overcome and are still overcoming, quite specifically in terms of trying to achieve our ambition and the UK government's ambition of providing real benefit to that knowledge-based economy, the theme of this morning's plenary. Land Registry has been around for over 150 years. As you would expect from its name, we are the Land Registry Authority for England and Wales, not for the whole of the UK. We have about 24 million titles, so cadastral titles, which have about 5 million transactions against them every year. And that equates to about 2 trillion euros of property which we are guaranteeing ownership and indemnity for. For the majority of that 150 years, we've been a very traditional organisation. So we do exactly what the name suggests. We register land. We have statutory authority and obligation to do that. And it's only really very recently, within the last 25 years, that remit has changed very much at all. Until 25 years or so ago, it wasn't possible for me to find out any detail of any property other than the one that I own. So very much a closed register. And we've moved very quickly, especially in the last 10 years, to a situation which is quite radically different to that. And Inspire and other open data agendas have been fundamental catalysts to that process. there's been quite a rapid recognition within government and within Land Registry in the UK in the last few years that there is greater benefit to be had from public duty. To the extent now we're quite significantly, our corporate vision no longer relates just to the provision of registration services, but as you'll see from the words there, has now been extended to cover the management and reuse of our data. And that's very key, especially to the topic we're talking to this morning. The reuse of our data is one of the primary reasons that we exist, as far as Land Registry itself and the UK government is concerned. That's quite significant. We're not just registering land, we're providing data to the British economy, the knowledge-based economy as defined by Alessandro. That feeds in quite strongly to two significant agendas that the UK government has, two leading agendas, one on generating economic growth, and I'll come back to that several times during the presentation. It's about creating growth in the UK economy post the slump of the back end of the last decade. But it's also about encouraging others, especially SMEs, to take that data and to go away and do things with it to create that economic growth, which clearly is fundamental support into that knowledge-based economy that which we've seen and heard mention of already this morning. Just stepping back a little for a moment then and looking at that in a wider context, I have to put Inspire there as the first bullet, and I'll do that on the next 2 or 3 slides, because as far as I'm concerned, and as far as Land Registry is concerned, Inspire was really the first evidence we had of this shift to data availability and open data. And I'll talk about that much more specifically in a moment in the Land Registry context. But since then, we've seen various global and European initiatives. We're all aware of the OGP, which now has quite widespread buy-in from across the globe. The G8 have an open data charter, which assumes that data from within government will be open by default. So clearly, it's a much wider agenda than UK or even Europe. There is global recognition of the need for data from especially the public sector to be made open and shared. Spinning out of that G8 open data charter, there is an expectation that all of those member states will have their own national implementation plans. Which leads me on to the UK context. And again, I've put Inspire as the first bullet there because the Inspire obligations, the Inspire legislation precedes most of the more significant open data activities that have happened within the UK. We have seen, though, within the last 5 years, a plethora of initiatives coming out of government, white papers, independent reviews of public data provision, and a clear and distinct commitment to national information infrastructure, which obliges all government departments in the UK to publish a comprehensive list of all of the data that they hold. Land Registry was the first organisation to do that, and we have, I think, almost 150 data sets listed on that inventory, which is available on the web. That list includes data sets which we don't intend to release, because not all of our data is releasable because there are concerns over privacy and fraud. But at least there is transparency about the data that we hold and which may be given access to under some restricted circumstances. But again, all of those initiatives at the UK national level are very clearly aligned to those two key agendas again of transparency and economic growth, again feeding into the generation of a knowledge-based economy and adding value within that environment. So how has Land Registry responded to that? I've talked about Inspire several times, and it's worth a slide of its own in the Land Registry context, because it was effectively the first catalyst as far as we were concerned, the first thing which effectively provoked us and prodded us to realise that we were more than just a registration authority, was 7 or 8 years ago, the knowledge and warning that we would have to make data available through Inspire legislation as the cadastral authority for UK. That actually was a fantastic and significant benefit to me because it allowed me and gave me the evidence I needed to build an infrastructure within Land Registry for the provision of data. Our registration infrastructure wasn't sufficient and appropriate for provision of data. It did registration, but it wasn't a publication environment. The fact that Inspire was coming was the reason we had to invest in that parallel infrastructure, which we've now been very fortunate to have because it allows us to publish much more data, much more widely than just the INSPIRE data. Significantly as well, it was the first example we had to use at board level to say, look, data is important, this is only going to get more important, we need to do something about making sure we turn into a data organization, culturally, infrastructurally, and technically. Perhaps most significantly, the fact that we had a 7-year warning of INSPIRE becoming a live obligation, we were able to focus on the data that we were going to provide because the data had happened as a byproduct of the registration service. So it wasn't necessarily in the right state and the right quality that we would want to publish it. It gave us a lot of warning to be able to concentrate and focus on the quality of that data. At one point during the property slump at the back end of the last decade, there were over 1,000 people in Land Registry focused on improving the geometry of our cadastral parcel data, a significant investment which INSPIRE catalyzed. Our data, our INSPIRE data, that's a cadastral parcel data set, looks like any other cadastral parcel data set, but we now make that available under an open government license. So as far as Land Registry is concerned, that data is there for you to download and take away and use internally in your organization without restriction. And we don't have a registration process, we don't have a licensing process other than the UK government's standard open government license. Now that adherence to strict open data standards, i.e. no requirement for registration, brings problems itself, which I'll return to in a later stage. We've done lots of other things, but I won't go into this in too much detail because time doesn't permit me. I've already talked about extending the corporate vision to recognize data. It's seen as one of the main drivers for change in the organization. And we actually have several key performance indicators which relate specifically to the publication of open data. So again, a continuous and quite in-depth focus on data provision at board level. In the last year or so, we've published several significant data sets. The one perhaps of most relevance to talk to here is the one in the middle with the blue box underneath it, the INSPIRE download service, which clearly followed on from the discovery and view service. Since we launched it in end of September last year, we've actually had 30,000 downloads. So that's not views of the data set, that's people who've come online and taken the data set or a subset of the data set. That's about 150 every working day. Now that's a significant number of people who now have copies of our data which they're doing things with. And we have a corporate target, one of those KPIs that I mentioned a minute ago, to publish all data that we have, that we can publish by March 2018. So a significant timescale which will see us releasing some kind of approximately the same number of data sets every year for the next 2 or 3 years' time. Now, I'd like to spend the last 5 or more minutes so that I've got left just talking about some of the challenges that we've overcome. Moving from where we were as a traditional statutory registration authority to doing all of that data publication and doing all of the other changes to the organisation hasn't been easy, and they're just a subset of some of the challenges we've had to address. I could talk for probably half an hour on each of those bullet points alone. I'm sure you wouldn't want me to, but I could. However, for the purpose of this morning's presentation, in terms of its relevance to the knowledge-based economy, I've just highlighted those last 4 bullets there because I think they're probably of most significance to the debate that we're having this morning. And I heard yesterday's plenary, and I've heard at several of the parallel sessions, that clearly INSPIRE has achieved a lot in terms of data publication, but are we engaging with the end user? We've actually invested quite a lot of time and money in promoting the fact that our data sets, not just the INSPIRE data set, but all of our data sets are now available. And that's partly responsible, I would imagine, for that large number of data downloads. We've run innovation competitions with SMEs. We've actually engaged with who we think our end user base are and tried to get them to understand what we're trying to do and engage with the data that we're providing. However, customer insight is the second point there. Because we're publishing our data under an open government license, that gets us a tick because it is pure open data. But because people don't have to register to take that data, all that I know is that we've supplied 30,000 data sets. I don't know who's taken them. I don't know what they're doing with it, which is a big problem for us, because we can just keep creating data and we can put it there for people to take away, but there's no relationship being developed with that end user, which is key for us, and we've realized that probably is a mistake. So in terms of creating that relationship, I'm very intrigued over the past few days to learn about the Danish example, where they have a voluntary registration process. So people taking downloads of the data can voluntarily register. They can say they're Mickey Mouse if they want to, but most people aren't doing. They provide an email address, and they can indicate whether they're interested in further engagement with the data supply. And about 30% of those users do. That actually enables a relationship to start to be developed. What I would like to do is to get to understand what people are doing with that data. Clearly that feeds back in terms of future improvements. But I think more importantly, in the context of the knowledge-based economy, the evidence is growing to show that few people are using open data and inspired data for economic benefit because they have low confidence in the data that's being provided. They have low confidence that it's going to continue to be provided. They have low confidence in the standard of the service and the commitment to supplying that data. By creating that relationship with the end user, we intend to effectively form an informal agreement with them, where we can say, we guarantee we're going to carry on providing this data for the next however many years. We guarantee to tell you whenever we're going to change the format of that data. So you can have the confidence to take away our data and go away and build new applications and new services based on that data. It's here to stay. So please do invest in creating applications that use the data that we're providing. Benefit measurement, allied to that same problem of not knowing who has the data and not knowing what they're doing with it, it becomes very difficult to understand the benefit to the economy that's being created as a result of that. We only engage with the people that we get to hear about. We see applications of the data or people who come to us with specific questions. There's a much wider user base there which we want to work with far more closely to allow us to understand and measure the benefit that's being created for the economy. At the moment, it's an act of faith, if I'm honest. We believe that by putting the data out there, it's creating economic growth. I can't prove it. I'd like to prove it, and I think by improving that relationship with the end user, that gives me the ability to do that. It's not completely scientific still, but a lot more scientifically than I'm able to at the moment. And I'd just like to finish, I'm probably over my time, by looking at sustainable finance. Free data isn't free to provide, so we have a distinct challenge in that we're not allowed to fund the release of free data from the charges that we levy on registration. So we're not allowed to take the money which we take from somebody buying a property and registering that property with us to fund the release of free data. So we have to charge for some of our data. That's a very difficult decision to make. Which data sets do we charge for? Which data sets don't we charge for? And again, that more mature relationship with the end user, I think, is very, very important to that whole process. So in summary, open data is inevitable. The move to open data is happening, it will continue to happen, and the pace will just continue to increase. To this audience, I would say, and I hope most of you would agree with me, that Inspire was the first to market as far as we're concerned, and it was a significant catalyst which positioned us and our ability to provide other data sets as well as Inspire. So Inspire has been a friend, if you like, to the organisation for the last 7 years. But I'd just summarise by repeating the points I made towards in the presentation. There is need for promotion of the data availability. that relationship with the end user. It's not just about knowing who they are, it's about building a relationship with them for the mutual benefit of both them and the data provider. And we do actually need to start proving that what we're doing is of benefit to the knowledge-based economy by harder metrics. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I think that the presentation was very clear in showing the opportunities that we have. But what about the capacity to manage this kind of information? So that is my pleasure to ask Henning Jensen from the Aalborg University that will try to focus on education and training.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Oh, I'm using a Mac, so normally. Here it is. Yeah. Education and research is a very important item for me as professor in the geoinformatics group at Aalborg University. It is generally also clear that education and knowledge is very important parts of the knowledge-based economy. And as Alessandro Annoni just said, that we need capacity in these fields. I have divided into 3 parts: the role of education in the knowledge-based economy, the situation within the GI sector, and some potentials and challenges for the future to be handled. Perhaps some of you have heard about the Lisbon strategy. I think most of you said that the European Union should be the most competitive and dynamic knowledge-based economy in the world by 2010. What about that? I think this is a bit forgotten, but we should be capable of sustainable economic growth with more and better jobs and greater social cohesion. I think we have went into the opposite way, but that does not mean that we should forget the ambition. A knowledge worker. Would you recognize one if you go around in Aalborg and saw one? You're all knowledge-based workers within here. But according to the OECD was actually the inventor of this definition of or concept of knowledge-based economy. Then a knowledge-based worker has a capacity to act autonomously and reflectively, use tools effectively and interactively, join and function in socially heterogeneous groups. So it is not only just a very narrow PhD in nuclear physics or some special medicine. There are more about this. It is also how to interact, how to work in groups. Education and the knowledge-based economy. Our finance minister in Denmark, Bjarne, he has said that we should move from the welfare society to the competitive society. And therefore, he is focusing very much on education, but not every part of education. Because education is seen as an economic factor from kindergarten to higher education. So there are actually plans for careers already in the early year of school. Also, education is now evaluated in terms of economic efficiency and expected economic outputs. Quite often we see analyses demonstrating that, if you have a higher education, especially within some specific fields, then you will earn much more money than the lower skilled people. Also, contributions to the enterprise culture are expected. It means that even from the primary, secondary school levels, they must earn to be creative, innovative, and have knowledge about entrepreneurships. So this is really a big change from the older time when that was focused on they should be skilled in working in a democratic society and contribute to the general welfare society. Oh. We are now, over the whole Europe, the whole world, having a modernization of higher education. The governments require more efficiency and performance from higher education, more students through the system at a faster pace. The university has also developed new bureaucracies to control what we are going to do as researchers, what the students are doing, how they are performing. And you can see there that this is exaggerated in a bit, but the bureaucratic is growing much faster than the scientific personnel all over the world. There's also a trend towards that the natural, technical, and medical sciences are expected to give more economic output than the humanities and the social sciences. It's also so at the university that there are more money into these three groups compared to the technical and medical sciences compared with the social and humanities. But if we want to have an efficient governance in the public sector, then we also need social scientists. I don't believe that a nuclear physicist or chemist will be very good to handle in normal local governments, for example. And also the humanities, they can contribute with creativity and social relationships. And it's a bit forgotten. There's so much focus on the wet sciences, as we typically call it. We're also much more focused on fundraising. It should be external funding. Horizon 2020 is an excellent example. But when we compare the Horizon 2020 with the FP6 or FP7, then there is FP7 that was very much focused on openness and open results and open data, etc. But in the current Horizon 2020, it is the opposite. You're focusing on patenting, because there is some ideas that free, open results are not good for economic development, but patenting is much better. Most universities are building research parks in order to stimulate creation of new, smaller companies in close relationships to the universities. And, of course, commercial spin-offs. If the university can have a patent, or the research park can get a patent, yeah, then they believe that there's a lot of money. But is it best to have open science or closed science? I think it's the same discussion we have regarding the open data. What is best, open data or commercial data? So these are some of the major trends in higher society. We also have a corporate identity. Some universities even use trademarks. They are managed as firms, as companies, with a board. And in Denmark, it's so that the board, which is actually the overall steering board of the universities, they have a majority of external people, typically directors from private companies. We're also ranking universities like consumer products. There's so much focus on to be number 1 or 2 or 3, of course. But even we have focused on, now we are within the 100 best, or the 500 best even. So, and in order to press this further, we have these the Times World University rankings, and we also have one with 100 under 50 years old. And Aalborg University is at that list at a good position. But it is really strange that we have this focus. And there is also an opinion that you can measure and you can describe everything with numbers. Numbers are totally dominant everywhere in the university and education sector today. We have also, for the smaller schools, we have the PISA investigations, or PISA comparisons, where you want to be ranking, and if it's bad, then you say, okay, we have to change the education system totally. So, because South Korea or Singapore or these countries are scoring top. The Google dream. I think many politicians, they say, what if we could have a new Google company here in our country? And Google it was created by two students from Stanford University. It was not because they have a lot of funding from outside. They were just creative and were working in a stimulating environment at Stanford University's IT department. Today, it's the most valuable company in the whole world. And we just discussed that, Google has much more power for mapping than nearly the whole Europe. They had just bought a new satellite company. So they are, in a way, the dream for many politicians, and of course also for many students. But it's not so easy. Because science, innovation and job creation. To the left we have Einstein and Niels Bohr. You know them, I suppose. They worked in this ivory tower, totally isolated from the remaining part. And it is the same with many other later Nobel Prize winners, because if you want to be really you want to create totally new science, then probably if you apply for money from the research council, they say, no, this idea is totally unrealistic. They need, if you want to be really innovative, to create some new technology, some new theories, besides the current research paradigm, then you need time to produce. We quite often say that Niels Bohr, he will be fired if he was a professor at a Danish university today, because he produced perhaps one paper every 5 years or so. But they were innovative. They were totally excellent. It was the same with Einstein and all these famous people. We can also see some other well-known people, Bill Gates, Steve Jobs. They do not have a PhD from a university. They actually, I do not know if they ever finalized a bachelor degree, but they were innovative. They have the idea of combining business possibilities with their own ideas, and then, of course, they have some very strong egos. Lego, it's a very huge Danish company. They do not have any. The founder of Lego has not any education. He was just creative. And then, of course, we have the Horizon 2020. It's hoped that this will contribute to make Europe again the most competitive society or competitive group of countries in the world. Let's see. Geoinformation in the knowledge-based economy. As you heard from the plenary, Jens Krüger, he told about geoinformation, the open Danish Open Geodata initiative, and it was clear from that geoinformation is now playing a very strong role in Danish e-governance, because it's now really realized that spatial information is a fundamental part of governance, because most of the data in a municipality or regional council, etc., they have a spatial component. And this have even the Minister of Finance find out. That's excellent. Also, the private sector has increasing focus on location-based services, creating demands for high skills in geoinformatics. As I said, I am leader of the geoinformatics program at Aalborg University. It's totally international one with students from the whole world. And all our candidates, when they have finished the master degree, they have a job. The jobs are actually waiting for them. And this clearly demonstrates that just within the geoinformation sector, there is a very, very strong need for knowledge and expertise. I'm involved in a quite recent project called GI Need to Know. It is an EU long life learning program where we are trying to analyze the current market demands regarding knowledge and skills and compare them with the current training offer in the GI science and technology sector. We are taking outset in the existing body of knowledge from the US, produced nearly 10 years ago. We have most European countries involved in this one. And it is really clear that there seems to be a strong difference between the supply side and the demand side. These can be a bit difficult to read, but I hope that you can, around the spider diagram, you have 12 knowledge areas, and you can see that generally there's there's only 4 knowledge areas on the supply side, while the demand side wants a much wider group of knowledge. Actually, all knowledge areas are demanded. And even to the right, we can see that, okay, there are some plans for expanding, but yeah, this does not fit. Generally, it's clear that most of the educations in geoinformatics are focusing very much on traditional cartography, and they're trying to just hide away the pure IT component like databases and programming. So we hope that what we are going to do is to develop a new curriculum for Europe, a new book of knowledge, body of knowledge, sorry, and then this can hopefully also contribute to facilitate exchange of students between different European universities, because we are in some way agreeing on the curriculum. It is without doubt that higher education is a prerequisite for the knowledge-based economy. It's also so that higher education provides higher income to society and higher welfare. Personal health is strongly related to higher education, reducing costs for the health sector and better personal life. So this is clear. But remark, I haven't mentioned that higher education can contribute to innovation, because I'm not totally sure about this. Actually, the richest persons in Denmark, they are not academics. They are not academics, but they are creative people in some way. They have built, based on their own ideas and creativity, they have built their own company from below. It is not a high technology. It is just practical, but it has very much use and millions of customers. The higher educated people forces people with low education out of their jobs. We can just see that, especially in the public sector, that academics are throwing out the low educated people, and that's not good for the public economy, because those people are more expensive. But if they just are doing routine work, it's nonsense. Is higher education a prerequisite for innovation and entrepreneurship? It is certainly not. But if you want to contribute to the knowledge-based economy in medicine or chemistry or telecommunication, all these value, then of course you need higher education. Will the growing trend to manage and control the universities strengthen or reducing innovative science and education? I think it's an important question. And finally, how to estimate the demand for particular education just in a shorter time horizon? I have heard so many prognoses for, you should not have engineers that are too many, so they close down the number of engineers. Then 5 years later, now we have a very high demand for engineers. And then they say, okay, we will then have much more engineers. So it's going like this, and probably this is not the most efficient way of handling higher education. But it's totally sure that if we want to compete with East Asia and the US, we must simply focus on higher education, but not only the technical and medical sciences, but also for the humanities, because a lot of creativity are actually coming by group work, and just consider Hollywood. It's a very, very big company, and we have many like these. So, thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Henning. And I would like to share what you say, and I would like to mention a recent study, a recent report that has been requested by President Obama about the capacity to analyze big data, so big data analytics skills. In the report that has been produced by a group of experts very close to the cabinet of Obama, it was clearly mentioned that today we don't have the capacity to deal with these things, so we need to invest in training in order to create new skills to deal with new challenges that we are facing. That is what you mentioned as a short-term issues. But let me move now to a different perspective, to the perspective for the small-medium enterprise. You know that Europe is quite different comparing to US or other big players like China. In Europe, we have mainly small companies that are not able to do the large investment like Google could do. And so how this company could stay on the market, how this company can profit of the investment the public government are doing in spatial data infrastructure. Please.
Thank you, Alessandro. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say that probably other representatives maybe of the small medium enterprises could have deserved better than me to be here. But now the floor is mine, and I'm ready to play my game here. I will simply tell you a story, giving you the freedom to consider at what extent it can be sampled in a representative way, the whole ecosystem. So very briefly, who we are, what we are doing, some tips to stimulate the discussion, main barriers we identified, but the barriers seen as challenges, and challenges turned into opportunities, and then some messages to be delivered, hoping to substantiate them with facts as much as I can. We are a micro enterprise, specialized in geospatial technologies. We are based in southern Italy. At this stage, I could say no comments, but just a few words, even though it's a region with marvelous mountains and sea and people. But at the end, all these resources are not yet leading to a stable and favorable ecosystem for growth. So we have some barriers being there, but we are happy to be there. And we are deeply involved in projects dealing with INSPIRE implementations. This is a picture of all of them, probably you have seen in the past presentations. I can say that probably all the 34 data teams of the 3 annexes of INSPIRE are tackled in one of these projects. But not only European funded projects, also some experience in implementing SAIS in Malta. Then we make a jump, because on the top right corner, with the INSPIRE, we became coordinator, which was a big jump, but I think we made our job, because in the final review we had 2 weeks ago in Luxembourg with DG Connect, the project officer congratulated with all of us as an example of they were happy to see how funds from EU have been well spent. And that's proudness, not from the coordinator point of view, which could be also legitimate, if I may, but from a taxpayer viewpoint. But we are involved also at local, in the less favorable ecosystem, because, for instance, we are running a very funny, interesting, attractive story with 11 municipalities in which we are making an experiment and we succeeded in putting a data model into a regional law. I don't know if you can imagine which is the other side of the proudness here. And then we are implementing this, which is very, very close to INSPIRE. We needed to introduce some more simple step, but the way is there. Barriers, we tried to classify in different types. Organizational, with 2 subtypes, within the consortia and with the clients. Technical, definitely, and also financial, not negligible. Within consortia, many times we have what we call a misalignment of technical competencies between partners, which creates some imbalance in the roadmap of the project. And this is an organizational barrier. With the clients, this is quite obvious. Many times we have misalignment of competencies between client and supplier, and sometimes there are very heterogeneous organizations in the structures of our clients, which should be able to benefit from the results, from the deliverables that we give. But we find sometimes some more expertise, in some other kind less expertise, and this is a barrier. In terms of technical barriers, I think that particularly yesterday we learned a lot about, we listened more than learned a lot about complexities. Sometimes we have to say that, I would like to say initial complexity, because then if the knowledge comes supporting us, the complexity will decrease. Anyway, sometimes particularly when different data policies apply, there is some mismatch, and in different data models required by different regulations, but I think that it's quite normal there. Financial barriers. This is obviously not applies to EU-funded projects, FP7 or ICT PSP, but in many local contracts, and also in procurement under the development regional funds, in which awarded contracts won offering price much lower than the reference one, sometimes offering below the 40%. Unfavorable payment clauses, sometimes 30 or sometimes 20% advance payment after the contract signature, and the balance payment after, for instance, 24 months of project running and under the final acceptance of all deliverables. And let me mention a third one, that sometimes we have big barriers when turnover thresholds are put, some very stringent requirements in terms of ensuring capabilities to do the work. So in this respect, I would say, dear procurers, please, following rules, of course. I don't want to play without rules, because rules are our life. But let's try, even together possibly, to define a system in which not necessarily having run a contract of the same value, big value, can ensure a procurer that this is the real best value for money. Sometimes we have the impression that tenders are built to select the winner, but let's think in a positive way. Barriers seen as challenges. Some responsibilities for us. Investing in filling in knowledge gaps. What we made, increasing manpower, plus 30%. Maybe I don't want to give you absolute numbers, because probably are ridiculous in terms of the economy we are talking about. But let's imagine if these percentages are multiplied by many. Huh? Increasing the time allocated to deep and inspire technicalities. At the moment, we can say almost 100%. We are focusing on Inspire. Our core business is Inspire there. Training, in our case, self-training. Thorough analysis of data specifications. Practice with data transformation tools, data harmonization workflows, training, acquiring, investing in learning. And then also communicating and sharing information, because this is very cost-effective. Investing in filling in communication gaps, spending more and more unpaid effort in supporting less aware partners and clients. This probably, at the end, is not very, it doesn't have a full balance, but is an investment that we made, and for us, it was successful. This is more difficult. Getting from the bank an increased credit limit, but we are surviving at the end. But all these investment, we already had returns, because they increased technical competencies, increased our competitiveness, increased our productivity, created new market opportunities for us, and increased our turnover. So we are already measuring this. Let's go to some conclusions and some messages. I heard many times here that we are Inspire 1.0, then we go to 2.3, but please don't leave us alone. Alessandro, Ugo, Chris, Wanda, Robert, Stefan. I can probably name all of you, and also other people who is not here. Don't leave us alone, because we need, in my opinion, a European driver, because the baby is growing up very well. Thanks for having delivered this nice baby, but it is too small to survive in a jungle. The single market is what we are aiming at, but it's not still, it's still unfair, the ecosystem, in my opinion. So don't leave us alone. Particularly in order to substantiate this, in coordinating we are aware that there is an alignment, a strong effort in aligning different European data policies in different strategic directives or thematic strategies. I think that there is room for a I don't want to say a better, but a stronger coordination. And also my impression is that now that the 1.0 is delivered, there is a risk that member states can play without a European driver, can move outside from some member states particularly. And we have this risk. I was not able to, there is a very nice painting of Gustave Doré of the Babele Tower, which is called The Confusion of Languages. I was not able to find a high-resolution image, so I took another one. But don't move a step backward, because we're aiming at this. We need an orchestra. Definitely. There is no other option from that. In terms of business models, we are hearing data as a service, software as a service, platform as a service, internet as a service, infrastructure as a service, and so on. Why not think about that? Inspire as a service. If we think, especially for our domain of small players, that an SDI, an infrastructure, is made by components. And if we reach excellence, we can make a network of excellences in each component, delivering the whole excellence. So I think it's better to, apart the, let's say, the joke of the acronym, to think about it. Let's try to, when we have the opportunity to be on a floor, to not make a sales pitch, but rather a networking invitation. Because look at this pomegranate. Did you try to break one of them? It's quite hard. If you want to crush just one single seed, it's extremely easy. Again, particularly for our ecosystem of small medium enterprise, let's try to emphasize this networking. It seems that big players are invading the market, are substituting to other players, but they need us. They need us. I don't want to open any battle against the big players, because the orchestra is an harmony. Van Beethoven is a symphony. Yeah? And so it's better to converge, to put efforts. Last message, please let us put passion in our work. Believe me, it facilitates turnover and returns on investment. Never stop to put passion in our work. And please don't tell me that we all have not passion. Because look at what we made a few hours ago, just 50 meters far from here. Without passion, it will never apply this. So, thank you. Sorry, guys, but I love Inspire.
Caro Giacomo, we will not leave you alone.
Thank you.
At least until my retirement, that could maybe next year. No, but now, just to show that we are going in the direction that you are recommended, I have the great pleasure to have today at our conference for the first time the unit in DG Connect that is responsible for public services. Andrea will, in particular, speak about the government. And as you know, Inspire has been recognized in the communication about the interoperability of public services as one of the best examples of sectoral initiative. So we have already played an important role for the modernization of public services. And Andrea, who attended the conference for the first time, see even more that we are not only dealing with environment information, we are dealing with all the aspects of geolocation services and geolocation information. So I think that you will bring back this message to your colleague, and this will be the way in which really Inspire is influencing the digital agenda for Europe. And I leave to you, Andrea, to elaborate a little bit.
Thank you very much for the introduction and also for the invitation. As Alessandro said, this is my first encounter with Inspire and the Inspire community, but having followed the last 2.5 days, I really see that there's a lot of synergies, the kind of, there is a shared spirit in the way where we think we're going with the government, and I really believe that there's mutual benefits we can take from here. And also yesterday from the panel discussion, I understood that you have now reached a maturity in the implementation of Inspire that can then take a step forward, and hopefully I can show you how it's then relevant what we're doing in the area of e-government in the Commission. So most of the work what we do in DG Connect and of course also on e-government is driven by the digital agenda, one of the flagship initiatives of the Europe 2020 strategy. And specifically for e-government, we also have an e-government action plan in place to really set a number of concrete actions. This is based on a ministerial declaration of ministers in the EU responsible for public sector modernization or e-government. And this action plan runs until 2015 and has 4 main pillars to modernize governments with the help of ICTs. On the one hand, we have a number of actions supporting the empowerment of users in all their interactions with government. We also have actions that would support mobility in the single market, and mobility in the sense that public services that work in one country should essentially also be accessible across borders. We also have a lot of emphasis on how to make public sector, public services, public administrations more efficient and effective with the use of ICTs, and work on the necessary preconditions, the necessary key enablers that would enable all this. So what we've been doing in the past was focusing a lot on helping member states in putting public services in a digitized format, and of course with the necessary back office reorganizations, and to have these public services also work across borders. This is a snapshot from one of our latest e-government benchmarking report. We continuously look at ways how to suggest ways to make public services more user-friendly and then see the results. And member states indeed score very high on different international measures in terms of digitizing their public services, in terms of making them more user-friendly. So we look at it from a point of view of 7 different life events. We also work on helping member states to actually make those public services then work across borders. You may have heard of some of these projects. They are helping these through large-scale pilots, help member states work together to make sure that they recognize each other's solutions and create an interoperability layer to make sure that the different national systems then work across borders. We've had a number of projects, for example, in the area of e-procurement, in the area of recognizing electronic identities across borders, in e-prescriptions, or, for example, setting up companies across borders, also electronically through a point of single contact, which is, for example, a requirement in the Services Directive, or having e-justice work across borders. The way we see it is that these projects have been developing what I would call building blocks or Lego blocks that can eventually then be used and reused for the creation of new and different services that then we've already tested them that they work cross-border in different sectors, in different areas. So we now have a very large project, eSense, which is then trying to see how these, let's say, generic building blocks can then work in other areas as well. And through the Connecting Europe facility, we'll be able to fund some of these digital service infrastructures to continue their operation in future as well. So this is where we are. I said we've kind of halfway through the action plan. And at the same time, we see that public sector modernization, of course, is gaining a lot of new momentum, not least due to the financial crisis. If you look at some of the documents also from the Commission, the annual growth surveys, you see that indeed public sector modernization can be a huge driver for growth. And so we've we've seen a lot of efforts also of public administrations to try and make efforts to become even more efficient and effective. And at the same time, tremendous changes are happening in the sense that new technologies are now widespread, people use them a lot. We've seen a huge increase of social media and networking societies, a hyper-connected society people talk about. And we've also seen a tendency that also through, let's say, right of freedom movements, but the data is becoming more and more available and open. So we started to think, okay, so what's next for public administrations? How can they then face all these new challenges, the new expectations even of users who are then experiencing different services, for example, in the private sector? So we realized that public administrations need to transform completely in a way they deal with their customers, their citizens and businesses. And so we started thinking, okay, so what can be a way to do that? And this is through this open government concept that I'd like to tell you. We also have put together a little paper on this in our unit on where we think this is going, and there's a lot of copies outside still. The idea is that if governments open up their data in a reusable electronic format, then of course this is open to other administrations, so they can be reused, but also eventually to third parties to come in and create new services. If this analogy is then used for opening up services within administrations and sharing them within administrations, this of course helps in reusing existing solutions. So that's already an efficiency gain, but also inviting or allowing third parties to come in and then create maybe more personalized, more proactive public services, and or just new services. We believe this can have huge benefits, both for the public sector in terms of efficiency gains, but also bringing in and creating essentially new markets, new jobs. I think here, for example, an example I told you earlier that the Services Directive foresees that companies should be able to, you should be able to create a new company across borders through a point of single contact, also electronically. So member states have been trying to put this in place, and it's usually an administration that is in charge of then finding or giving out the right permissions and all the documents. It could, however, be foreseen that in future, since a company, when you set up a company, you may need to open up a bank account, you may need to find new facilities or hire people, that additional services could be added onto this point of single contact, like bank services and so on. And why not? This point of single contact in future could be eventually actually handled by the bank itself. And we look at this analogy also in opening up decision-making processes to the extent possible for engaging with people in the policy-making, policy decision-making. And we see that this creates a nice ecosystem of this open government based on collaboration, transparency, and participation. It's got economic benefits. There is political sense, because with this transparency and openness, there is more legitimacy for government, more trust, more accountability as well. So this vision, what we have also put down in this paper, foresees a modern European public administration that it provides, together with third parties, digital services, user-friendly services that are then delivered in the channel that is preferred by the user, and that reduces the administrative burden to the minimum. We would like to see public administrations connecting across Europe, both for allowing these public services to work across borders and close this gap in the single market in the area of public services as well, but also for the reuse of useful solutions, and for governments to open up data, services, and processes, decisions, so that third parties can come in and create new services, more user-friendly services, but also to help in essentially improving policies. So what is needed? What can we do? It's a huge thing, and ICT is really only an element to it. It's just an enabler. So we realize that, and I think it's clear from a lot of the other discussions also that it needs a huge change, because clearly government departments will need to kind of open up from their silos. It's a cultural change, it's a business process change. It needs new skills to be able to do that. It needs also new business models to better understand how does it work when some of the public services are then provided or created or co-created and delivered by private entities. So this raises a number of questions. For example, governance. Is there a need for governance so that we ensure that at the end there is public value created? And what's the role of government going to be in a situation like that? Will government be managing assets in society for the creation of public goods or public value? Will government become a platform where anyone can come in and reuse some of this information or assets or tools or whatever that may be, resources, for the creation of this public value? So what we are trying to do at the Commission at the moment is to try and test how this approach could be beneficial, to have some good practice cases. We've already done some in the past through the SIP program. I understand some of you are familiar with, under the cloud of public services. There's also some brochures out there about some project examples. And under Horizon 2020, we're trying to fund projects that would prove this concept or the benefits of this concept. So under Horizon 2020, ICT-enabled open government topics can be found under Societal Challenges 6. And I've listed here 3 specific call for proposals in 2015. One is about looking for good innovative ideas where open data or open services are aggregated for the creation of new user-friendly services, or using the openness and for enhancing transparency of the public sector. We also have, this is an innovation type of project. We also have a call for proposal for research projects to see how emerging technologies, for example, from another setting or another industry, could then be implemented in the public sector to pull innovation and research into the public sector and research results. And we also have an SME instrument. This is specifically for SMEs, and to create e-government mobile apps. We will have an ICT Proposers Day in October in Florence, where you will be able to hear more about these and also essentially meet, find partners, for example. And these are the websites where you can find more information about all this, what I've just talked about. There is this vision paper, which we would like to hear your opinion on, so there's a possibility to reflect and give us your feedback. There's also the website of Horizon 2020 and then also of our unit, so you can contact us through there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. Also, because your presentation gave me some point for formulating a question to the panel. We are looking to the different aspects about the knowledge-based economy from different perspectives. But what about partnership? What about merging the effort from the public sector and the private sectors? And in particular, we have good example in the field of, for example, geospatial standardization, in which industry, academic sector, and public government are sitting together to try to develop standards for interoperability. Do we have similar example in terms of developing services? It's more difficult to see at the moment how your business model that you're proposing in the government, in particular, when you say the government should build services that should be reused by the third parties to develop new applications. So how do you see in the future the evolution between the relationship between public authorities and private sector in order to make what is the dream of e-government a reality? Who want to answer?
I think it is indeed a dilemma to better understand how essentially what we're saying is that some of the public services that are now delivered by government could then be partially or fully delivered by private sector. So I would see this as a possibility for definitely for a close cooperation between the private and the public sector to be able to do that. There are some emerging business models, but really on a small scale. There's some ideas also in that paper that says that yes, there are some trials, but I think we're still at the beginning of it. But certainly some kind of partnership between private and public sector will be necessary to move this forward, at least at the beginning.
Giacomo.
It's very interesting what we learned about. We'll go through with a lot of interest in this publication, because if I'm not mistaken, if we today look at this PPP acronym, public-private partnership, is a sort of huge framework in which some few specific domains are embarked on, but in which the scale, as far as I know, is quite big. So I think that new mechanisms, like the ones you are mentioning, in order to lower the scale, to go on at a more granularity level, in which more simple and viable forms of public-private partnerships, for instance, at local level, at some local government level, can definitely support. Because sometimes, for instance, it happens, as in our case, that the public authorities, they, at local level, they, in this economic crisis, let's say, they have to, in Southern Europe mainly, they have to reduce the funds available to the normal procurement schemas. So if some rule can be settled up in which more simple schemas and more small-scale partnerships can be put in place, I think it would be very good for us.
This is a recommendation to report to your colleagues. Andrew.
I think our perspective is that by the very fact we're publishing our data, part of the intent behind that is that the private sector will take that data and will develop complementary services to ours. So that's very much behind our open data drive, that effectively stimulates those partnerships. They're not formal partnerships, because anybody can take that data and create a service, which is probably more than just the statutory service that we have to offer, and that's really fundamental to the I think the UK government's drive behind making data available. SMEs, whoever, can take that data, create more complexity, combine it with other data, and perhaps in doing that create a more inclusive service for the citizen that we would never do from our particularly narrow focus.
Want to add something?
Henning? I would say that I'm coming from Denmark, which has quite strong cooperation between the private and the public sector. But I think if we are moving into real governance, there may be problems about generally we have so that we can fire the politicians at the next election if we are still dealing with the public sector. But what about if it's a private sector, a private company? We have no who is actually responsible for decisions taken by them? I think there's a balance there. I think the private sector can contribute very much to develop system and to make a more efficient public sector. But when it comes to responsibility and accountability, etc., then I think we will have some very huge challenges regarding democracy and etc.
Just to add to that, I mean, this is clearly an important element. So it's not to say that clearly there are legal obligations for states to make sure that certain services are delivered to everyone, and and maybe it would also be some of the governments would decide, yes, this is something we want to definitely deliver for free and to everyone, so keep them within ourselves. But what we've seen is that there's so many new you call it challenges, societal challenges that may come up that maybe only affect a certain part of society that government is no longer able to really afford, or its commitments it's made. So there may be some areas where you could then bring it in, and that's why I think it's important to understand what kind of governance would then be on top of it. How can you ensure continuation of core services? How can you ensure privacy, for example, when some of the services would be delivered by public entities, private entities, and how do you ensure accountability and legitimacy of a government? So these are huge questions, and I think we're still at the beginning of it, that we'll have to.
And then I have clearly, Andrew showed one way, a very important way, that is the reuse of the information that has been promoted by the Commission longly with the original direction of public sector information, reuse of public sector information, and now with the acceleration of open data, is really unlooking the data that is needed. This is an area in which Spark still has to do some progress, as reported by the consultation that we made. But still is the one direction, public information used by the private sector. What about the other way around? Information collected by the private sector that can be used by the public sector. I have a good example. There is a company that is specialized in constructions that has decided, I will not tell which is the company, I will not tell which is the country, because otherwise I make advertising. This company decided to invest to create a very accurate digital elevation model for all the country, because they said it is better then we can position ourselves in the condition to make infrastructure, to design infrastructure very quickly. So they are using this information for their business. This information can be used for other businesses from the government, for flooding, for whatever we can use. It is something that is looked somewhere and used only few days in a year, where that can be used in a regular way if there is a kind of public-private partnership to allow this information collected by the private sector to be used. It's requiring a new way of governmental, private sector relationship, and is again questioning about which will be the role of the government in the future in terms of data collection if the majority of data will be collected in the future by the private sector. So who can give me its view about this?
I think
Andrew, please.
it depends on, I think, which data you're talking about and which part of government. Talking from the very narrow focus of land registration, I don't think you could ever envisage that we would take registration data from the private sector, because they don't have that role. So it does depend specifically on the data, but I would argue that if the private sector can collect data which isn't statutorily required, then why shouldn't we enter into partnership with them? If it's the most efficient for the knowledge-based economy, then surely, as society as a whole, we should take that most efficient route.
Okay. Henning, you want to say something?
Yeah, but I think that it is absolutely realistic, but and it's even used today. For example, the Danish very, very detailed digital elevation model. It has been partly been produced in a private-public partnership, and it is totally produced by private partners. So that's an example. But many of the government data in Denmark are collected as a part of the daily work by the municipalities, because they are collecting details about houses, children's, all planning and welfare things. But on the other hand, I believe that we will have, for example, within the environmental sector, we will have more data provided by private organizations, because we are just observing that a declining amount of money is allocated to environment. And these kind of voluntary geographic information, or crowdsourcing, or what we are calling, it can be from bird watchers and these not so extremely sensitive data, which so we can accept that perhaps it's the the accuracy is only 90% or so, but I think that this will be an opportunity. All of us have such a device, and many people are just collecting data about many, many things, and this can be applied by the public sector. But of course, still having in mind that the quality, there's no high quality within the data, but it's better than nothing.
I will question about, for example, there is today a clear work started in the statistical office about the use of mobile data to derive statistic index about mobility. And the data about mobility are in the hand of the telecommunication companies. So unless that there is not a partnership between the telecommunication companies and the government, you cannot have, the government is not able to measure how the people are moving. It's our reliable data because they're dealing with information collected by, with accuracy, that is the accuracy of the positioning of the mobile. But let's go to question from the audience. Do you want to, please? There is a microphone somewhere? Yes. Ah, the personal assistant of Karen. Thank you.
One point that none of you mentioned is the role of the third sector. So civic society within this delivery of systems and delivering information to and from the public. And I think that it needs to be there, so I would like to hear your opinion about how they are playing part, because also in the UK, for example, with the Land Registry or with other bodies, we've seen My Society, an NGO, basically doing an important work in this area, and there are many other examples.
Very good question. Who wants to answer?
I try. You're right that this important component was not mentioned here, but simply probably because there was no one representing one of the NGOs or the groups that you're mentioning. But definitely the fact that that's not mentioned does not mean that it is not playing a key role from different perspectives, not only in terms of data providers. We have many examples of well-established crowd data mechanisms, crowdsourcing. Also, we have apps from the European Environmental Agency already contributing to make noise watch or other things similar. And so it is definitely an important role. There is a debate in terms of the quality of the data that can come from crowdsourcing, but I think that there is room to improve and to avoid any barriers that can rise from that. And then lastly, the citizens. I think that we heard in almost in all the sessions here in the plenary that when we talk about users, I think that the end user, the ultimate users all of us are playing a role in order to achieve the citizens' satisfaction at the end from all the viewpoints. So I think that even though not mentioned, but it is clear that probably the major role is there.
If I may, I'd love to answer, not being a member of the panel, but the Commission is recognizing the importance of citizen engagement in all the sense. And there are action in we call Science 2.0 or citizen science or digital science. Each DG is using a different label, but when you look to the content of the different vision, you can recognize the same element proposed by DG Connect, by DG Research, or other DGs, including DG Environment. If we take the example of OpenStreetMap, in Africa, the quality of this information is much higher than the quality that the African mapping agencies can produce. They will be never able to produce this information because they are not funded, they don't have the capacity. So if I have to use data, authoritative data from Africa, I will use OpenStreetMap. I will not use the data provided by the official mapping agency. This is clear. In other cases, you can see that the quality is comparable. And this is again going to the role of government in the future. How to deal with the fact that there is competitors providing same quality of information. They still have the responsibility to provide authoritative data, but they have to compare what they are providing is more accurate or not. And this is challenging, and I think that our colleague of the National Mapping Agencies already recognized. And if you look to a document that has been published in the form of the UNGJM initiative that is called the Future Trend of Geospatial Information Management, you will find the chapters in which the mapping agencies are recognizing that they have to find a business model to deal with data collected by NGOs or citizens. Is a challenge some mapping agencies already introduce as potential hook to define when there are errors, and then they start their process to verify, to send their surveyors, so they are reducing the cost of updating. Other agencies are not yet prepared. But in some area, the information collected by citizens will be essential. And biodiversity is a typical example in which we are using information collected by individuals since decades. And now we have the possibility to have a global biodiversity facility, so the information, we just accelerate the way in which information is posted. Before were paper maps, and now we have posting directly with the mobile. In other areas, we are still thinking that we need a mature model. Please, Andrea.
And also maybe from the point of view of users in let's say, an open government setting, the role of civil society we see it could be huge, because they would be the ones understanding the needs and requirements of a specific community. So it would be then easier for them to, if these conditions were there, to then create public services with the availability of open data or services that really fit the needs of that community. And you mentioned My Society, and yes, indeed, they've created, for example, Fix My Street as an application, which then allows you to take a photo of a pit hole, sends it automatically to the municipality, and they send someone to fix it in a much quicker way. So yes, it could be that a lot of these initiatives will then come from specific communities or civil society organizations or NGOs.
And I think that this also touching the user, and Andrew, you put one of your challenges, how you have the user insight. And this is actually the same problem from a different angle. Can you tell me what will be the strategies in order to have the user insight in UK?
I thought the simple beginning of that will be to introduce the registration process, the voluntary registration process, so we at least then know who they are. Once we know who they are, we can engage with them, understand their requirements in far more detail, and then that relationship becomes a much more mature one, because there's trust and engagement in both directions. And we envisage that then, once we've got to that level, we'll be able to develop the data to more suit their end requirements. And we may not have all of that data, so it might not be as simple as saying, we'll just add some extra elements of data into what we already provide. We might need to provide that or source it from elsewhere. Yeah. That could be the third sector, or it could be public or private sector. I don't know until I know what that data is, but absolutely.
Okay, thank you. There are two questions, then we close the session, because otherwise people will complain.
Thank you. I will continue to the other question on the addresses. Yesterday I was finishing with the example of our base register of territorial identification addresses and real estates. And it's a system given by the law, and there are thousands of organizations involved, but naturally there are also mistakes and gaps. And nowadays we are in the process of negotiating with the OpenStreetMap crowd, and we are combining that the roles of defining particular parts of the address, it means the street name or the number of the house and the cadastral description, are in responsibilities of different public bodies. And it means when we get the response from the public organized via this open network, We, as the provider of the all register, allocate then the claims or the attention marks to the appropriate bodies. And so the process is combined, they check the reality, and we manage then, or will manage the process to get the system more and more updated. And actually there, as I mentioned yesterday, the open data are provided for use, are incorporating our official data into their databases as many others.
Thank you, Eva. This is a good example of emerging business models that are already happening, and maybe we don't know how many of these will already are happening in reality. There was a second, Salius.
Solus Urbanus from Geographics. I'd like to ask Andrea, actually I'm very much in support with the vision you presented, but it would be interesting to know how you will encourage implementing that vision to national governments. Would it be some kind of set of national initiatives, or maybe some criteria in national structural funding programs, for example, maybe some other ideas, so maybe legislative document will come of us promoting that vision?
As you know, it's difficult. The Commission doesn't really have a mandate on how to, on imposing a way of going forward in terms of public administration or how you set it up. What we have been doing with the government action plan, so for more than 10 years now, is really bringing together member states to share good experience and try to move them towards similar goals, and also to make sure that those solutions that work in one country work across borders as well. And this is our aim with this as well. We've already presented this to member states, we're discussing, and clearly there are several member states who have already embarked on this approach. And I think what we now need to show is that there is a benefit for all, for the public sector in terms of efficiency gains and for businesses. So I think we're at the beginning. From the legislative point of view, there's a number of legislative actions that encourage the opening up of public sector data, like the PSI, like through Inspire, and I think this is already creating the kind of spirit. We also have put in place, for example, a mutual recognition of, or putting in place the mutual recognition of electronic identities, so you would be able to use public services, electronic public services more smoothly. So there are some areas where we have some leeway, but some other areas where it's difficult for the Commission to really impose something. But I think what we need to just show the benefits, and through some of the funding programs we can allow to have good practice cases that prove it.
Okay, I would like to close this session and start the final closure section, but before to do, I would like to thank again our panelists. And then let's go to the last presentation before that you can return home, if I can find it. Well, as usual, I have the honor or the burden to close the conference and to close the window, close the door, cleaning the room. And this year, what is good, the good news that the session will be extremely short, because the session is expected to start at 12:30 and ending for the lunch at 12:30, as you can see in the program. So it's less than 1 minute session. Wow. In reality, there is not like this. So, and like every year, I have the challenge to wrap up something that I haven't seen. Because clearly, it's not possible immediately after the end of the conference to collect all the input and to analyze all the input that are produced by the rapporteur of the different sessions, including this one, to try to elaborate and to formulate some key conclusions. So, as usual, I will try to invent what I capture in the air and what I heard in the corridor discussion, in the lunch break discussion, etc., and as well in the comment of the 3 plenary that I have attended. So, 1 week in Aalborg, Inspire has only 34 data teams, but there are 700 of burger types in Aalborg. So the complexity of Inspire is nothing comparing to the complexity of the menu when you try to order a burger that you don't know what you can have. So which are the lessons learned? People hate Inspire. It's too complex, it's too technical, there are no users, there is not enough progress on open data policies. Nobody can understand the policymaker say, what is that? But the people love Inspire, because it's building a community, we are sharing problem and solutions, we are modernizing public services, Andrea, and we are establishing partnerships. It's really new? No, it's the same things that we repeat in several years. What is new that we love Inspire song and also dancing? That is new. Okay, but more seriously, what is new? We are at the crossroad, and we can select the direction. Wow, well, is there really an option? So how we can survive? Well, maybe I think that we keep our strength. We have some strengths. We are always talking about our weakness, but we have some strengths. And we should be able to not be afraid to afford the new challenges. We can jump to the new opportunities. We can try to overcome the obstacle that we face today. We should not be afraid about this. We were already doing quite impressive work to develop such complex framework in, I would say, a limited number of years. If we compare to other directives, the progress that we made is exceptional in this so short time. So which are our challenges? This is what I capture. I hope that I capture everything, but if not, don't complain on me. The first things that is coming in all the presentation that I listen, in all the discussion, where are the users? We need to bring users on board. How? Because this is easy to say, but how? What I understood that we need more application. We need more pilot, more application that are using the infrastructure, that are demonstrating the advantage to invest such amount of money in the infrastructure. But the infrastructure is complex. Okay, then we need to simplify the use of infrastructure for professional users. For example, developing specific API that are adding the complexity of the infrastructure. So the user can only just use the infrastructure services are hidden, are simply used through better simplified interface. We need to make Inspire more popular. We need to make Inspire more popular, for example, using more mobile apps application, which people and citizens are starting to see Inspire services in action on their mobile phones. And now they are starting to think about the value of Inspire, like people are using weather forecasting services on their mobile. I don't know the complexity of the weather or the meteorological infrastructure that has been put in place in 50 years. That is very complex, and Inspire is very simple comparing to the meteorological infrastructure, I can ensure, in terms of standards, in terms of protocols, and so on. We need to ensure the data that are delivered through Inspire has a good quality, and that the services that are supporting are operational to support real applications. In most of the case, due to the, I would say, the low level of maturity of Inspire implementation, it is very difficult to have today stable services that can be used by the industry to develop applications. So we need to think about maybe to make some prioritization in order to start to provide at least services to support some specific application. And then we can see which are the applications that are more important and more demanding. Communication. We are always communicating the complexity of Inspire, and we are never communicating the benefit. So we should change the way in which we are communicating. If we communicate the complexity between us is fine, because we are here to address and to discuss complexity, but it's not what we need to communicate to the user. When yesterday I tried to go to the Inspire website and to understand which are the data teams. I find all implemented roles, I found everything. I didn't find the table that I'm using to see which are the data that are covered by Inspire. This is not the way to communicate Inspire properly. Inspiring the world. You should not underestimate the importance that Inspire is increasing playing in the world. I'm so lucky to be involved in several international activities, and everybody is looking to us with really admiration. Say, what you are doing in Europe is unique. How you can do the same in Latin America, how we can do the same in Africa, how we can do the same globally. My good friend Ivan Deloach was here. He was attending the Inspire conference for the first time. And yesterday he was so happy to have spent 3 days with us because he learned a lot. And they are working on national spatial infrastructure since 10, 20 years. And he's learning a lot of what we are doing. But how we can inspire the world? We need to do more on education and training. And during this conference, I had the opportunity to have a section organized by the World Bank and to have a discussion with Russia, Ukraine, and other countries. And they need clearly need some help. They need some help to build the capacity to be able to play also their role in Inspire. And we need to help neighbor countries. Which are the neighbor countries? 0 kilometers or 10,000 kilometers. The advanced discussion that we have with Latin America, and then Inspire is mentioning the Brazil legislation. Now Nicaragua is interested to implement Inspire. So there is not really a distance of what is a neighbor countries. For me, a neighbor countries is a country that have the same spirit. It's a country that is understanding the Inspire principle, is understanding the Inspire philosophy, and want to join the club. I think that if we want to capture the interest of the policy maker, you should do something like it was presented by Ivan Deloach when he said Obama, with chairing the G8 and agreed on open data, is giving a signal. Why we are not giving the signal, showing that Inspire is not a European unique initiative, but is a global concept that can be exported. And we can do through partnership with organizations, and we have already some organizations that are mature, and we need to start to provide operational services, for example, for climate change applications that are requiring information to be collected globally and not only at European scale. And we have in the US, for example, the Climate Data Initiative. That is something that I recommend all of you to have a look, because introducing, for example, of climate data challenges, in which they try to combine the approach to have a top-down approach to see, oh, these are the climate data trends, and to see what the local community can do for adaptation or to minimize the impact of the climate change. Then you are establishing collaboration between the local and the federal governments. We started already in extending Inspire to other policy area application. I had the pleasure to see the marine data infrastructure presentation this week, and this is the way forward for me. One system for several solutions, not one system for each solution. So this is the concept of infrastructure. And I like the presentation. I didn't put your presentation, Andrea, because I discovered today, but it's exactly your concept. Inspire is a catalyzing infrastructure that is serving all the need for different applications. And the concept of Inspire as infrastructures is something that you put in your presentation, Giacomo, and I think that is a good marketing concept that we can reuse. I also would like to mention, because I saw a few presentations, but I didn't want to miss the poster session. And when I looked to this poster that was called Archaeological Research Data Publication Through SDI, I was astonished. Why these people are using INSPIRE specification to publish archaeological data? And then you see that these people say, okay, why not? We can connect, we can modify the data models, and if you say that our data models are complex, visit the poster, you can see a very complex data model for archaeological SDI. But these people are really capturing the spirit of INSPIRE. INSPIRE is giving the framework, and then people can develop application, can plug in, and can do something that was not originally foreseen and will be never part of the INSPIRE, I would say, governance. So, which are the challenges? Another challenges. Everybody is telling us we should integrate the Inspiring Key initiative, and I hope that with Andrea we will be able to fully integrate Inspire in the government. We are already doing a lot for Copernicus. Inspire is mentioned several times in Copernicus regulation, but the two communities are not yet talking enough. And I take an example. Copernicus needs reference data. I have the opportunity to have Chris here with us. They try to see how Inspire can provide the reference data that are needed for Copernicus. But we are not yet an operational infrastructure that can be used by Copernicus. So why not to accelerate the development of the components that are needed to support Copernicus services? Copernicus has some limited funding opportunities, but can help in making some acceleration. So by a strong and closer dialogue between Copernicus and Inspire, we can really implement what is already included in the principle of the regulation. The same for Galileo services. Galileo application based on location services will be something quite important in terms of funding. So just keep this in mind that there are additional funding opportunities. We saw in the presentation of Andrea there are funding opportunities. She was so kind to already to put on a slide where you can have fund for modernization of public services. But there are other initiatives. My colleagues were discussing today about the intelligent transport systems, and we try to be sure that Inspire network services, Inspire data specification can be reused in the framework of the future intelligent transport systems, and so on, and so on, and so on. And the same, we have something that there is some development on the field of the public health information, and we are closely discussing with our colleague of DG Sanco in order to keep a strong link between the information that Inspire have to provide in its data teams, etc. And at the global level, we have this new initiative, UN Geospatial Information Management Group, the Commission together with the European Agency and the member state have put the proposal for the creation of UNGGIM Europe. Presumably, this will be adopted at the UNGGIM plenary in New York in August. And next year, we will have an additional forum that can help, that can overcome some of the current deficiencies that we have in Inspire. One of the problems that is a recurring problem, Inspire is not dealing with data quality. We know Inspire is not only dealing with data sharing, but one of the scope of GGIM Europe will be also to deal with data quality. So this could be an opportunity to have an additional forum when we can address something that we are not currently, is not currently addressable within the Inspire frameworks. So how we can fully integrate, set up partnership, I mentioned these examples, explain the value of Inspire, again, use material like what has been presented by Eva, what has been presented by the Marine SDI. Explain the value, explain what Inspire is really doing in terms of changing the data landscape. And adapt Inspire to support. This is the key. Inspire has been designed with use cases, theoretical use cases, When you go to the real situation, you can see that you need to do some fine-tuning. You need to correct, you need to add elements that were not originally foreseen. So you should be ready when you are serving the users to change and to do some adaptation. The last, I think, is to rethink about business models. This is my preferred subject, is when I'm investing a lot of time, or my personal time. I'm really in depth studying how the private sector is evolving, and I can tell you that there are something new initiatives that are astonishing. One of the examples is Skybox, that has been acquired by Google, that is giving to them the capacity to be completely independent, don't require any other data. They have the capacity to have all the data that they need to do everything. So how we can survive, how we can stay in the market if we are not understanding what the private sector is doing and how the private sector is evolving. I will take another example. Digital Globe is the company that is providing the satellites that are not today used by background images in Google Earth. And this company is moving from the business just to provide satellite to the business to provide an infrastructure that people can use. And so on and so on. So we need really to understand how the private sector is evolving, but also we need to better collaborate with the private sector. The example that Giacomo mentioned, what we can do in terms of public infrastructure to facilitate the development of services that the small medium enterprise can develop to address specific end user demands. This is something that is also part of the reuse of the infrastructure for third parties. How we are, I would say, collecting the requirement from the private sector to reuse infrastructure. The approach taken in UK is just one part of the solution. Give the possibility to the private sector to reuse the data. It's not dealing with providing also infrastructure element to the private sector to process the data, to analyze the data, etc. Should be this a role of public government or not? Again, which is the role of the public government in the future is one of the questions. So we need to be open to change. Technology is changing every day. We cannot change every day, but we should have a clear vision on how to adapt to technological change. Before the plenary, our colleague of OGC was asking me, but yesterday you say that you don't want to use geospatial standards. I didn't say this. I say that in the future, geospatial standard and IC standard should be fully integrated. And there should not be 3 different types of standards because there are 3 different types of communities that start to develop the standard. And in the digital agenda, there is, for this purpose, a platform that is called a multi-stakeholder platform for ICT standardization that is including all the big organizations that are dealing with ICT standardization. So if we want to simplify the way in which services could be developed, we have to reduce the number of standards, and you have to be sure that the standards are fully integrated with the main ICT standards that are the standards that are supporting internet. And I say it's open to societal change. I think that we should not ignore, and personally I will not ignore, the fact that there are different data streams that were not at the beginning of Inspire, but are on the table today. And I'm speaking about information collected through social media, I speak about information collected by citizens, I speak about big data, etc., etc. But the more important thing is to have a better balance between what are our mid-long-term objectives, that is the implementation of the implementing rule, etc., and what are the short-term priorities. If we want to start to demonstrate the value of the infrastructure and to start to see that we can develop services, we are forced to modify that deadline. We cannot wait 2018. That is the deadline that is proposed in the Inspire directive to have the data fully harmonized. For some of them, when we decide that is a critical application, we have to accelerate the process. I don't say that all the deadlines should be changed, but if you want to have an application today that is requiring 3 of the data teams, why don't we invest to accelerate to make these 3 data teams available as soon as possible? This is, for me, a crucial point in which you should agree. Otherwise, it will be impossible to show the benefit of Inspire, and the next time that you have an evaluation report, we will still have, we cannot show the benefit because we data are not yet there, etc., etc., etc. So it will not be credible. To summarize, recommendations that are coming from sessions and from what I capture: improve coordination, all governmental level, European level, national level, and between also organizations. Increase open access to data and simplify licensing scheme. The model that you use in UK is clearly a model that is facilitating the user. No licenses, no user registration. So really people can start using the data. I don't say that we need to go immediately to this step, but this is a model that if the open data movement will continue to proceed at the current speed, and Andrew say is inexorable trend, then instead to try to make complicated investment to have a user authentication, user registration, compliance license agreement, think about that in 2-3 years you will be forced to give access to the data. So better to move now than to wait too much. Enhance communication, provide best practice, guidance, become more user-driven, based on real use cases, not relevant. Develop Inspire as services, but maybe develop Inspire as infrastructure. This was before this session, so and then should be underpinned by a better data management. Build and engage in partnership. And again, I think that if you want users on board, you have also to engage not only, you have to engage with private and citizens, and accelerate implementation to address the need of Inspire users. And last but not least, collaboration is fine, but when you are working really, and I have a lot of personal experience, you should start thinking about sharing resources. Not only collaborating, but really sharing resources. And when I say sharing resources, including sharing resources between the public and the private sector, for common investment, for common goals. Don't look only at the public sector that is funding something that is used by the private sector, but think about doing certain things together. It's possible. So last year I was optimistic. I say, we move from 3 point far, next year will be 5. It's not like this. We are 4. We made some progress, but still something to be done. I don't know. I don't put any forecasting for the next year because otherwise I will lose again. I hope that will be 5 next year, but still we have some progress. And then it's making me happy that we are still progressing, not so fast as I forecasted. So with this, I will like to thank for your attention, and clearly I wait you in Lisbon, but before to close, I invite Ulla to come here, and as well Henning, please. We need a microphone for Ulla. Oh no, maybe you can use this one. I would like to say a few words about Henning and Ulla because they are my victims. Last year in Florence, the night before the end of the conference, Henning was saying, we are interested to host the conference in 2015. I say, 2015 is already booked, but you have the opportunity for 2014. It was just the night before announcing. And Henning was desesperated. He tried to call Tom and say, they are asking the next year instead of 2 years. And finally decided, yes, I will do. So we were able to announce the conference in in Florence. And then the poor Ulla was informed after the decision that was taken, creating a lot of troubles with the Danish government, etc., because it was a decision taken by me in the night before the conference without the proper consultation with the Inspire national contact point representative. But I would say, after having seen the conference, that I am very happy of my decisions, because the conference was very successful, and I will thank you for very professional organization. Thank you. Thank you. Do you want to say something?
Love you.
Just a few words. It has been a pleasure for us at Aalborg University to host this conference. It has been a pleasure for us to also see so many people here in the farther north part of Denmark. It is actually called I'm living in Copenhagen, so generally I consider Aalborg. Yeah, it's far to north. Ulla is also from Copenhagen. But I will say that I love the city, and I hope that you also have gotten an opportunity to not only listening to the presentations, but also networking at the cafes and bars and restaurants in the city. Actually, when we started, I was a bit concerned, are there really so many restaurants and bars in Aalborg so we can have 500-600 people served there? But I think that you all have got what you need regarding drink and food. So, by these words, I will just use the opportunity to thank my two colleagues at Aalborg University, mainly Line. I do not know if Line is here. Probably not. Okay, but I think you saw her yesterday. She received this globe as a GI Norden Award, and she has done an excellent job and support for me. And also Lise, who is sitting there, has been very, very busy since Sunday morning with supporting the arrangement here. And finally, I will send my many thanks And finally, I will thank you very, very much, Karen Fullerton. It has been really a pleasure for me to work together with you, and I think since January we had nearly a Skype meeting every week, sometimes twice a week, in order to handle this, and I have just found out that you are wonderful to work together with. So thank you for this cooperation. Finally, I will say that before you are going out and home to your country, then there's a sandwich and a bottle of water you can take with you, because I think you are all very busy, just hurrying to the airport or where else you are going. So by these words, I will say thank you once again and have a nice trip back.
Thank you. See you in Lisbon.